All right, hello everybody. Whoa, there we go. There's some sound. Cool. All right, thank you for coming to our lunch. I know it's a crazy day. Everyone's running around like crazy. I appreciate you stopping, having some lunch here with us. I think everyone here knows me, but my name is Patrick Webb. I work with Americans for Prosperity, Montana. We have a special guest in town today who I wanted to bring before you. I'm not coming here to pitch you any bills or ask for you to vote or do anything like that. I just want you guys to hear this man's story who's with us. He has an amazing story, and it speaks a lot to the power of the individual and how much, we can believe in somebody, in people, and we can empower them to find fulfillment and overcome obstacles. And that's what you guys are doing here every day, doing the work of the people of Montana. So I would like to introduce Matthew Charles. He is one of the first recipients of the First Step Act, which passed with bipartisan support nationally at Congress, and it was signed by former President Donald Trump. And with that, I'm not going to speak anymore because we're here to hear from him. So please welcome Matthew Charles. Feel free to move that however you want.
Okay. Thank you, Patrick. I want to thank each and every one of you for being able to come out and listen. I do work with an organization as well called FAM, but I also side with Americans for Prosperity because they believe in being fiscally smart, with our tax dollars, as well as every human being should be able to fulfill, their destiny, have potential. So therefore, I'm gonna just share some things with you, and I hope that I'm able to answer any questions that you may have afterwards. My name is Matthew Charles. I was actually born in the 60s. My father was a very abusive person. He was also an alcoholic. And because of that, I don't blame my upbringing and my own faults because of that, but it added to some of the childhood trauma why I made some of the decisions that I did make. But in 1995, I was arrested in Tennessee for selling drugs, crack cocaine. I was given a 35-year sentence. But prior to me receiving that 35-year sentence, when I was in the county jail, I got arrested in December 1995. I surrendered my heart and life over to the Lord in February of 1996. At that time, when I surrendered my heart and life over to the Lord, it was because several things that had occurred while I was in the county jail. But prior to that, I didn't even believe in God because God never showed up and spared my parents or my siblings my father's abuse. So once I ended up giving my heart and life over to the Lord, everything just completely changed. I became a completely different person. It was so effective that it surprised me while it was happening to me. So once I ended up being sentenced in December of 1996, which was like 11 or 10 months from the time that I had given my heart over to the Lord, I was distraught. But I had learned a little bit about faith because I had read the Word of God. The Bible was like one of the only books that was in the county jail. I'm going to say this and then I'm going to go back to the story. I believe that a true transition comes from a relationship with God, an encounter with God. But anyway, I had changed, and once I received the 35-year sentence, I was taken to a federal prison. And because I was different on the inside, although I was the same on the outside, and all the charges and offenses that I committed and my past still stood, I knew that something had taken place. So I just continued to live a Christian life. I got to the institution, and once I got to the institution, normally whenever I went to a prison, I wouldn't sense anything because that was the type of environment that I was used to thriving in as an old person, the old man that is now dead. But at this institution, I was able to sense, once I got off the bus, that there was, violence and hostility in this place. I was taken to USP Terror Hut in Indiana. It was called the Terror Dome because of so much violence on the institution. So once I got there, I went over to the chapel, learned what day they had services, and I just started looking for, like believers on the compound. Well, while there, I was able to work as an educational tutor. And it was funny because I got that job by happenstance. I was told that I didn't have my high school diploma or GED in my federal pre-sentence report. Well, I had graduated high school in 1984 and was a veteran because I had been discharged from the military honorably in 1987. So I'm like, no, I got my high school diploma and I am a veteran. They was like, well, it's not showing in the paperwork. So they said they wanted me to take the GED test because it's mandatory that if you don't have your high school diploma or GED, you have to take this test. So I was like, going back and forth, like, I already got it. They was like, well, you're gonna go to the SHU, which is the special housing unit, if you don't take it. So I took the test and scored significantly high. So they called me back, and instead of saying you don't have it, which they did secure the paperwork from the state of North Carolina showing that I had it, they was like, not only do you have it, but we want you to be a GED tutor. So I went back up there and I was able to work in the GED department, and I was able to help a lot of men be able to achieve receiving their GED certification. And as I was speaking with Representative Carey, I know that it's important that a person receive an educational benefit while they're incarcerated. If not, they're going to return to their same surroundings, and they're also going to be limited in what they can and cannot do. And the First Step Act, which Patrick spoke about, which was the bill that actually allowed me to become free. But before then, let me just go back a second. When I was incarcerated, I was able to work as a GED tutor, work as a law library clerk. I was able to work on my own situation. So once that took place in 2010, the law changed, lowering the crack to powder cocaine ratio from 100 to 1 to 18 to 1. I hope you're kind of familiar with that on the federal level. Well, the only reason that I was in prison for a 35-year term instead of a 10-year term was the misunderstanding or the discrimination or racial disparity between the drug types, crack cocaine and powder cocaine. So it was lowered from 100 to 1 to 18 to 1. I had already served 21 years, day for day. So that automatically meant that I was able to be released. So in 2016, federal judge Kevin Sharp released me. But the government appealed it, and I was actually sent back to prison because they were like, no, you need to go back and serve and remain in 10 years. So it was appealed, and at that time, while it was going through the appeal process, I got released in 2016 and had been out 2 years, being a productive member of society. I had a church home, I had a job, I had purchased a truck, and I had my own place. So I was doing everything that you would want a productive member of society to do, as well as volunteering my time and services and mentoring. So once they found out that I was being returned to prison, Tennessee News, as well as a lady named Juliella Martinelli that worked for NPR, came out and interviewed me. And she was like, they're returning you to prison? And I'm like, yep. Then she said, well, did you have any incident reports or write-ups while you was incarcerated? I said, not a one in 21 years. She was bringing new discoveries to me that I didn't think about. So I was like, no. And she said, I'm gonna research it and see. So she was able to see that I didn't have any disciplinary reports or any infractions. And then so she started pushing the story. Well, at that time, the story had came to President Donald Trump and Jared Kushner of my situation. And when I went back, they were working on granting me a pardon or commutation because they was moved by my situation and story. So as my story continued to grow wings and more people started to hear about it, I was returned to prison. And I was there for, I would say, 70-something days, and then the First Step Act passed. Well, the First Step Act, the original bill, wasn't meant to release me. As a matter of fact, Senator Chuck Grassley, who's a comical fella, he told me when I went to visit him, he was like, it was because of me that you're released. But at first we had a strange conversation, which I'll probably share with you in a minute. But the First Step Act initially was meant to allow people to receive good time credit, earn good time credit for rehabilitation, whether it be vocationally or educationally, because the prison had become so punitive that rehabilitation was taken out the equation. It was just you serving 85% of your sentence, and that's what you had to serve on the federal level. Some states make you serve more, some states make you serve less, but it's not based on rehabilitation. So when I received a 35-year sentence in 1996, at 85%, I would have had to do 31 years, whether I changed or not while I was incarcerated, whether I became a better person or stayed, a mean, scoundrel and just did things that I wanted to do on the institution. So long as there's not an incentive, and that's what the First Step Act did, it proposed an incentive to people that says, if you're willing to change, we're willing to give you a second chance. But we're gonna have to walk side by side. We're not gonna walk in front of you and pull you along, and we ain't gonna let you drag us. So that's what the First Step Act did. But in late December, because I was looking at the First Step Act, and I was really glad that this was going to allow some people to serve less than 85% of the sentence on a federal level. But it didn't affect me. You know what I mean? I was going back because the ratio was 100-to-1, changed to 18-to-1. They said the 18-1 don't even, can be granted unto me. So once all that took place, the last week or so, I was sitting there watching the Kentucky news, and I ended up seeing Senator Rand Paul state that it would also allow what took place with the lowering of the drug amount in 2010 to be made retroactive. I'm like, what? Because that's what I was being sent back for, because it wasn't made fully retroactive. So anyway, while we was waiting on President Trump to grant me a clemency or pardon, and we had word because a Georgetown professor had taken my case pro bono. Like I said, my situation had taken wings to where it was known throughout the states. Some of you may remember me, some of you may not, but I was the prisoner that actually attended the State of the Union when President Trump and Melania Trump invited me to attend in 2019. That was me on the TV saying, hey. But anyway, what it took place was I was incarcerated. We had word that he would grant my commutation of pardon. I had no idea that the First Step Act would affect me, but what had taken place was once that got added to the bill and I heard Senator Rand Paul make that statement, I'm like, wow. And then after then, in December when it was signed, in January, not the Georgetown professor, but my two attorneys actually filed a petition back to the district court saying, hey, the First Step Act makes retroactive those changes in 2010, so now why don't we release him? And the judge agreed, and the prosecutor, who also was fighting me hard on it, also agreed. A lot of people like to say because it was public pressure. I said, nah, he had to change of heart. But anyway, he decided that he would not contest it anymore, and I was set free. Well, after I was set free, 2 weeks later, I hear from the attorneys, and they send me an email. And those attorneys are asking me a question and getting in touch with them. So I get in touch with them, and they asking me, they said, President Trump administration trying to contact you. I'm like, for what? You know what I mean? I'm surprised. But I knew that I was waiting on the commutation on pardon, but that had got pushed, behind the scene once I was released. And she said, they want you to call. So once I called, they asked me, did I want to attend the State of the Union? And I'm like, yeah, I want to attend the State of the Union. I ain't got no business in Washington, D.C., let alone going to the State of the Union. So I was like, yes. So they brought me up, and for those that are aware of it, they didn't have the State of the Union in January when they initially supposed to have, because there was a government shutdown. And they wanted to wait till the government shutdown was over. So I was able to go there, and I was able to go over to the Congress and meet many other senators and representatives in Washington, D.C. that actually, signed the First Step Act or helped, put it together. And that's when I was telling you that I had the funny conversation with Senator Chuck Grassley. I was in his office, and he was telling me, he said, Matthew Charles, he said, do you know how many speeches I gave on the floor against guys like you? I'm like, okay, what I'm doing in here, you know what I mean? But then he said, no, he said, but I was the reason that you are actually free today. And then I was like ready to grab his hand and shake it then. But anyway, he was like, yes, he said, I the one had them add the condition to make it retroactive, those changes in 2010. And I was like, okay, thank you, sir. And then he was like, I understand now, a little bit different than I did in the past. So I met a lot of senators and representatives on both sides of the aisle. I was able to see Senator Chuck Grassley, Senator Dick Durbin. I was able to see Senator Cory Booker. I was able to see Senator Mike Lee, who has become a friend and champion to me. But at the same token, I was able to meet these people, but I went back. Then I received a call the very next week and said it was on, the State of the Union. Well, at this time, not only am I being invited to the State of the Union, but I'm being invited to the White House to go in and meet the president. So as I go to the White House and I go on those grounds, as I stated now, I ain't got no business in Washington, D.C., not a man like me with my past, but it just goes to show you what God can do. He chooses the least of these to help the least of these. But anyway, once I got on the grounds there and I started walking on the compound, I heard somebody say, make way, get out of the way, get out of the way, like that. So I stood to the side, respectably. And they was like, the vice president coming, like that, right? So as soon as the vice president, he's come walking down with the Secret Service, as soon as he sees me and make eye contact, I always knew, aware he knew who I was. You know what I mean? So he sees me and he runs over there and give me a bear hug. I'm like, wow. You know what I mean? And he's like, you want to take a picture with me? I'm like, yes, sir. I said, but they took my camera back, my phone back there. Because, when you come in, you got to check your camera in. They didn't do that after but the first time they made me check it in. Since I've been back, several times after that, this thing been with me in my pocket. But anyway, at that time, I was like, they took that at the front gate. He's like, well, I called somebody over, and he called a photographer, and we took a picture. And he's like, I'll make sure that you get it. And he did. I got that picture. So anyway, after that, I was able, and I was like, well, this is the vice president, not the president himself. So once I was able to go into the main office of the White House and meet the president, as soon as I started to cross through the threshold, he was like, get over here, Matthew Charles, I knew you. Now, prior to that, I had a heaviness because I didn't know how I was going to be received, you know what I mean, period, let alone in the White House. So once he said that, it just broke all, the fear away a little bit, and I was able to go there, shake my hand with him, take a picture with him, and contrary to what anybody may say, this is the first person that ever shook my hand and said, you're going to do a lot of good for a lot of people. I hadn't even had the position to be able to go and speak with any legislator at that time. I just was invited to the State of the Union, and he pronounced those words, and it came true. Because shortly thereafter, I was given a position with FAM to go around speaking to governors, legislators, and at colleges, speaking with college students about the importance of criminal justice reform and the need for the communities to get involved. So anyway, to make a long story short, after that, I was invited back to the White House for Second Chance Month Initiative, which took place around March or April. And at that time, I was working for an organization called FAM because the Coalition for Public Safety, which is under Executive Director Holly Harris, when we was having a FAM gathering in Washington, D.C., she came up and she said, you know what? She said, I'm going to give FAM like a grant to hire you so that you can go around and speak. And I was like, okay, thank you, you know what I mean? But that's what I've been able to do since then. But the thing that's so important to me is that there are so many people stuck in the system. Now, I believe just like Americans for Prosperity, just like FAM, just like all the other real, true criminal justice reform, that you got to hold a person accountable. I also believe in personal responsibility. I take full responsibility for all my wrong actions. But I also know that I received a sentence in excess of 25 years just because the racial disparity between two drug types, when it has been scientifically proven that they're not as potent as the other. Just one is used in communities of color and one isn't. And the sentences is dramatic, 100-to-1 difference in sentencing. So, like I said, I believe that holding people accountable, I believe that a person that commits an offense should be given an appropriate sentence. I believe that that should always be a back door for anybody that doesn't have the death penalty, so that if they make tremendous strides toward rehabilitation during a period of incarceration, that we get away from incapacitation. Because that's literally what I had with the 35-year sentence, even though it was at 85%, and I would have had to do 31 years, that's incapacitation. You just take an individual, set them out of society, and then when his time is up, put him back in society, whether he's changed or not. And that's what causes the recidivism rate to go up, because people was like, well, I didn't get no help when I was incarcerated. Everybody turned their back on me. I had to do the majority of my sentence. Now mind you, there are people that change for various reasons. You don't just need to implement certain things, as far as like the First Step Act did, that causes some people to change. Some people change because they age out. I went in at 29 and came out at 51? I did 22 years total. Then you have some people that change because they were married and had children, and they realize that they're missing everything pertaining to their child. The child is growing up, he's graduating, he's going to college, or he's getting a job, and you're missing out on all of that. So people change for a variety of reasons. But my firm belief is that if you add an incentive for people to become rehabilitated, and you let them know that we're not leaving you out of society, because we know that 97% of people that are incarcerated that do not have the death penalty are going to be released back into society. They're going to come back to the same communities. They're going to work side by side with, whether, you don't hold the positions that you do now, but if you have a regular job, they may work side by side with you or your children, you know what I mean? Or they're going to interact with you in grocery stores or department stores. You know what I mean? So we want to make it to where they're able to come back and be a productive citizen and be able to find employment. Because as long as you can gain gainful employment, that limits you being a recidivist. As long as you can come out with a trade, whether it be a vocational skill, whether it be something that you learn that's necessary in the workforce, or whether you come out with a college degree, that's going to make you more employable. That's going to allow you to be able to get a job to not only sustain you, but your family legally. And I know also, when I was incarcerated, it was funny because I have 33 credit hours that I was able to go to college for, and my grade point average is 3.9. But once they told me I had to pay for it, now I definitely couldn't pay for it in society. And I was fortunate enough to be able to take it for free when I was. But once they changed it and then you had to then start paying for it, I had to drop out. But I didn't stop being an educational tutor. I didn't stop being a GED tutor. I just ended up, doing what I could do. And then when the doors open of opportunity, I believe God opens a door and closes a door. You know what I mean? So therefore, when the door of opportunity opened, and because I was able to come out and they was able to see, for those that did watch the State of the Union in 2019, when the president stated, he was like, well, this is Matthew Charles, welcome home. But prior to him saying welcome home, he said he took over 40-something different Bible correspondent courses. He helped over 100 people receive their GED certificate. Well, he said helped a lot of people with their GED. He stated, I worked as a law library clerk. As a law library clerk, I helped people be able to get their sentences reduced or be set free, and I couldn't even do anything for myself. But like I stated, God had changed my heart. So now I was being more of a helper instead of a hindrance. But anyway, he stated those things, and he also stated, that I was out for 2 years and doing everything that you would want a person in society to do, but I was returned to prison. So the First Step Act was the bill, and I was the first recipient of it that was set free from it. Now over, I want to say 4,000 people for those 18-to-1 drug offenses that are no longer 100-to-1 have been released. Now there's compassionate release that allows a person, based on the judge's assessment, no longer the Bureau of Prisons that holds a interest in keeping that person incarcerated. Now I do believe some people need to be incarcerated. I'm far from saying they don't, but I'm just saying they need to have an appropriate sentence and that we don't need to try to fight to keep them in when we know that that person is progressing and can return to society and be an example for some of those that are still behind bars, that whenever they get out, they can also succeed. And when they fail, it's their own doggone fault, you know what I mean? And not the system fault. So we know that all of those things are possible. And like I said, I'm glad that, Patrick Webb asked me to come and speak. Like I said, my goal is to continue doing what I believe, is in my heart. I left a lot of people back, that are still incarcerated. I think I was speaking with a lady here a few minutes ago, and she was asking me where do I go next. Well, I get to go to Washington, D.C. Next weekend, and we're supposed to be speaking about trying to change that 18-to-1 to 1-to-1. And the reason being is because in 2010, you had prior federal judges, you had prior prosecutors and former prosecutors, you had attorneys, defense attorneys, and private practice attorneys, and you had scientists saying that our fear of this drug was misunderstood. And now we have a law that made it 100-to-1 that needs to be changed. But at the time, the climate wasn't right to change it to 1-to-1. It was only right to change it to 18-to-1. But now we see that we have grown as a nation, as a people, and realize that any disparity that is based on, racial or social stigma can't be allowed to be in the justice system. Lady Justice is supposed to be free and equal to all people. So I have the opportunity to be able to go there. And one thing about me, I'm gonna share this one more testimony. Patrick, am I all right? Okay, one more testimony. It was funny because, do I want to share? Okay, when I went down and I was able to speak with Governor DeSantis in Florida, he used to be a senator, and I was able to share the fact that, I received 25 years longer just based off of, the fact that, this stigma was attached to this drug type that I was convicted of. So I was glad to see that he was in full support of the First Step Act. And, it just allows a person to be able to look at it from a different perspective. Now, I believe that a person receiving a commutation of their sentence or pardon is necessary, because those executive actions need to be utilized by the president and the governors, because those are some of the quickest ways to right a wrong. But the best way to right a wrong is to have it legislated. Because if it's legislated, then you don't even have to worry about it being given out, partially. Then, it just, everybody's able to benefit from it. And we know that people are getting away from truth in sentencing, or you did the crime, you do the time. And it's funny because I was able to speak in San Jose, New Mexico, with a man who had been with the state police for over 20-something years. And he is now a criminal justice reform advocate. And when I was there speaking, they had an opportunity to ask and answer questions, and he was talking about mandatory minimums. And he said that some mandatory minimums are good and some of them aren't. So automatically, I knew what he was saying, but he was using the wrong terminology. And I knew he was for criminal justice reform because he was in a room with other criminal justice reform advocates. So I said, sir, so what you're saying is that some people deserve a longer sentence and some people don't. He said, that's right. And I said, so do we need a mandatory minimum for that? Ain't the judge able to just make the assessment and give somebody that deserves a longer sentence, a much larger sentence? He was like, yeah. I said, well, do you realize that with a mandatory minimum, that a person that deserves a lesser sentence can't get the lesser sentence because the mandatory minimum is in effect that says, I can't go below this? I said, so the judge can automatically always increase a sentence, but he can't go below a mandatory minimum. And I said, and plus the judge who has the first example, having that person's case history before him, is able to make an accurate assessment of what that person deserves behind bars. I said, but if you utilize a mandatory minimum, then he's stuck. And we noticed that even Judge Kevin Sharp, he left the bench, and he's been a champion for, and he had that bench for life. But he had to give a man a life sentence for the same offense that I committed and was serving 35 years on. And when he done that, he decided that was enough and he retired. So since then, he's become a staunch advocate for criminal justice reform. But his hands were tied. A man named Chris Young, who was released by President Trump, right before President Trump left office here, he was one of the ones to get clemency or pardon. So he did get released, but he had Judge Kevin Sharp had to give that man a life sentence. And it hurt his heart because he said this person, based off his childhood, coming up, and everything that he had done, and he wasn't the major, conspirator, didn't deserve a life sentence, but he had to impose one. So that's what a mandatory minimum does. It locks you into an amount of sentence, and the judge can't go below it. And so therefore, that's not fair to the judge. We think that the judge should be the orchestrator in his own courtroom. But right now, the prosecutor is. Now, mind you, prosecutors are necessary because they'll bring the offenses for the state or the victim. But at the same token, whenever a judge hands his bound and he sees a person before him that has childhood trauma, a mental illness, or a drug addiction, a mandatory minimum says you can't take any of those things into account. You have to impose this amount of time. So that's not fair. So the organization that I actually work for is called FAM, Families Against Mandatory Minimums. And from the outset, that's what it did. It stood against mandatory minimums. In the late 80s, the lady that formed mandatory minimums, her brother, who had never had a conviction in the world, received a 5-year mandatory minimum. And she said it tore her family apart. And because of that, she became the executive director of Families Against Mandatory Minimum. But today, we don't utilize the acronym the way that we do because we address everything from a person interacting with an officer to pretrial detention, to him receiving an appropriate sentence, to him serving that sentence, being able to have an avenue during the course of his incarceration to receive some type of rehabilitation efforts and reentry once he is released. But I thank you for allowing me to tie up your time, you know what I mean, and for hearing me out. And I thank Americans for Prosperity for asking me to come down to the great state of Montana. Y'all have a beautiful building. I was admiring that as well. So I just want to thank everybody for listening, and hopefully we'll do what's appropriate at all times. Thank you.
Yeah, so with that, if there's any questions, Matthew, are you cool with taking a few questions? I know some of these guys are going to have to be getting going here pretty quick, but there might be a couple questions that we could sneak in. That's okay. I think we'll start with Senator Small over there.
Okay, how you doing, sir?
Good. How are you? And for myself, and I imagine everybody else, thank you for being here today.
Okay.
It was a great story, and I surely appreciate hearing a good story. I have a couple, just two questions for you. One is, in the state of Montana, even though I haven't looked at the numbers here lately, we're running a minority recidivism rate around 20% or greater generally, and I was wondering what it's like in your community, especially amongst the, the different ethnic backgrounds. Are you that high, or?
I would say they definitely that high. I would say that when it comes to recidivism rates, I would say probably Pennsylvania and Florida are some of the worst. And the reason being is because they're being sent back for technical violations.
Yes.
And we're trying to state that a person shouldn't have to go back for a technical violation that ordinarily wouldn't, be a crime. Say, for instance, he, failed to show up at an interview with his probation officer for whatever reason, or he, just didn't show up to work or did something else that was minor. Well, we feel that that should not be an offense that sends that person back to prison. And the reason being is because prisons are already crowded, and the people that need to be there are some of the people that are violent, some of the people that have just, freshly committed actual crimes. So therefore, we don't want to flood it with those that are doing recidivism. But in answer to your question, Mr. Small, the fact that sometimes, it actually goes from that school to prison pipeline. And let me share what I mean by that. Well, because like I said, I don't just want to base it off of race, but I just want to show a particular period in regards to race. We know that whenever a person of color, oftentimes they are suspended from school or expelled. And most people that are suspended and expelled, they just quit school. You know what I mean? Stop going to school. Well, that person that stops going to school, sooner or later, he's going to be incarcerated. He's going to commit a crime and be incarcerated. Well, once he commits a crime and becomes incarcerated, now everybody has a plan into that individual's profitability-ness, not his own potential, but the probability of what they can acquire off of this person. Because now I believe in police, so don't mistake any statement that I make. Okay, so the police that arrest him is paid to do a service, and the prosecutor who takes the case is paid to do a service, even though they are elected. The judge who hands down the sentence is paid for the service. Once this person is transferred over to prison to start serving that sentence, the prison is paid to keep the individual. And once he is released, the parole or probation officer is paid. So everybody is profiting off of this individual, except the individual himself. Sadly, they're profiting off of his downfall that he himself placed himself in. You know what I mean? So that's the reason I would say that when it comes to the recidivism being unequally handed out based on skin tone, oftentimes it's because of that. And it actually goes back to, community policing, how an officer, sees somebody, of color and decide whether he want to stop that person, or, you can see the person jaywalking or doing something, minor or whatever, and that first interaction with that person allows that person to have the potential of being incarcerated.
All right, thank you. And you guys mind if I ask him one more? Oh, okay. Yeah, I would like to crack a lot of it up in this state, the geographical segregation, the inability when you get out to access the program. So just like you said, it becomes. And then the second question, obviously talked about finding faith for one, and secondary education while you were incarcerated. Mm-hmm. What do you feel was the greatest tool you had when you got out to, basically not recycle your previous situation?
I would say the greatest thing that I had was it was Christ on the inside, but it was also the fact that I was determined to not be a statistic. The fact that I was looking for a job that would allow me, I was about to get my CDL license, as a matter of fact, allow me to be able to get a job that I would be able to make a living wage off of, be able to learn a skill or a trade and do. So I believe that anybody that goes into incarceration that has the ability to take a trade, or receive higher education, it allows them to be able to return back, fill out that resume, that application, show that they're able to perform the job. And then it would be up to the employer to hire that person. We know that oftentimes you've heard of the statement ban the box, because ban the box allows you to check that you are a felon. And before you even meet the employer that want to hire you, he's already seen that you are a felon without talking to you. And now you are excluded from conversation with him. So I believe everybody should be able to not be immediately excluded, because you still could be excluded after the conversation with them. But at least you're able to have a conversation with them and say, this is what I'm able to do, and this is what I've done, and I would like for you to give me a chance because I'm actually going to work, a little bit harder than the average person because I got something to prove to myself and my community. All right, thank you, sir.